Sometimes the loudest stories start with a room that finally feels calm. Not peaceful in a cinematic way, just quiet enough to hear your own thoughts again. I didn't rebuild my life with second chances or grand apologies. I rebuilt it with night shifts, 5 years of spotless tax filings, and the kind of stillness that comes when you stop waiting for people to change. I work when most people are asleep. My commercial kitchen sits in an industrial strip in Aurora, Colorado, wedged between a tire shop and a warehouse. The fluorescent lights are harsh, and the mixers are loud, but the air always carries the scent of butter and vanilla. My business, After Hours Bakehouse, operates on a simple principle: work has rules, and rules don't lie. Last month, those rules finally paid off. A regional cafe chain signed a weekly contract, and a corporate manager doubled their catering order. I ran my numbers slow, methodical, and precise. I realized I'd been living in a cramped apartment out of habit, not necessity. Buying a house as a sole proprietor wasn't easy. Banks don't care about your hustle, they care about paper. I gave them plenty. 5 years of clean returns. No mystery deposits. I watched a loan officer flip through my life's work as if looking for a reason to say no. She finally nodded. "You're organized. I like organized." A week later, the house was mine. On my first night, I sat on a folding chair in a kitchen that felt like a promise. No furniture, just space. I slept like someone who didn't need to listen for trouble, but success leaves fingerprints. A local paper ran a feature on Aurora's small businesses. They photographed me on my new porch, keys in hand, a success story. I didn't think twice about the exposure until a week later. On a Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed, motion detected. I didn't rush to the door. I pulled up the camera feed. Standing on my porch were 2 figures I hadn't seen in 13 years. My brother, Ryan, looked exactly as I remembered, broad-shouldered and wearing a set jaw that suggested he owned the ground he stood on. Behind him, my mother, Patricia, clutched her purse, her eyes scanning the house with a look of quiet assessment. They had luggage, scuffed, overpacked suitcases. I didn't panic. I went to the entry console and picked up the folder I'd prepared the moment that article hit the press. Pattern recognition is a survival skill. I opened the door only as far as the security chain allowed. "Lauren," Ryan said, his smile appearing before his conscience did. "Come on, don't make this weird." "We're here," my mother added, her voice tight. "Let us in." Ryan nudged a suitcase toward the threshold. "Mom said we'd stay a few weeks. You've got the room now." I looked past him at the bags. This wasn't a visit. It was a transfer of their chaos into my order. "You aren't staying here," I said. My voice was as steady as a delivery confirmation. Ryan's smile slipped. "You're really doing this after everything Mom did for you." He shifted, angling his shoulder toward the gap, testing the pressure. I didn't flinch. I just held the folder, the physical boundary of the life they hadn't helped me build. I didn't invite them in, but I didn't slam the door either. I stood steady. The security chain stretched tight between us, feeling the draft of the Aurora morning collide with the residual heat of my ovens. Ryan shifted his weight, his eyes tracking the movement of my hands. He looked like a man who had spent his life waiting for doors to eventually yield. "You're acting strange, Lauren," he said, his voice dropping into a low, practiced rumble. "It's been a long drive. We're tired." My mother, Patricia, didn't look at me. Her gaze flicked past my shoulder, cataloging the granite countertops, the industrial refrigerator, and the meticulous order of my workspace. "It smells like sugar in here," she murmured, as if my success was a scent she could simply claim. "It's a kitchen," I replied. The words were flat, devoid of the emotional hook she was fishing for. Ryan's mouth tightened. "Look, we just need a place to land for a while. You're clearly doing well. We saw the feature in the paper, the house, the contracts. It was quite a success story." There it was, the article, the digital fingerprint that had led them to my porch. I remembered the photographer asking me to hold my keys up. a symbol of a dream earned through 13 years of silence. At the time, it felt like a milestone. Now, it felt like a beacon for the very people I had outrun. "I have deliveries to prep," I said, keeping my tone business neutral. "You cannot stay here." Ryan laughed, a sharp, abrasive sound. "You're still doing that thing where you decide the rules for everyone else? Be reasonable." "Lauren." Patricia stepped into the light, her face softening into the mask of the moral enforcer. "Lauren, family doesn't shut the door. Your brother has had a hard run. We've all made mistakes, but this house is big enough for all of us." I didn't feel anger. I felt the calm of a person who had already run the numbers. I reached for the folder on the console table. I didn't rush. I simply slid a document through the gap in the door, just enough for the bold headers to be legible. Ryan squinted. "What is this?" "Some kind of joke, a cease and desist," I said. "And a formal notice of no trespass. It's already been documented. If you don't leave..." "I don't have to argue. I just have to call the authorities." The air between us curdled. Patricia blinked, her composure fracturing. "You had this ready. You expected your own mother to show up and..." I read the news. I told her. I know how entitlement works. Ryan's jaw set into a hard, ugly line. "You think paper protects you from us. It protects my property," I said. "And my peace." I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I simply guided the latch until it clicked into place with finality. I leaned my back against the wood, listening to the muffled rise and fall of their voices on the porch, until, finally, the sound of tires on gravel signaled their retreat. The kitchen was quiet again. The scent of butter and vanilla remained, untainted. I washed my hands, checked my production list, and went back to work. After they left my porch, I tried to do what I always do: clean up, move on, pretend the noise didn't get in. I packed orders until my wrists ached. I labeled boxes. I lined trays on the cooling rack. I answered 2 vendor emails and confirmed a delivery route. Normal things. But my body stayed keyed up, like it was waiting for the next knock. I kept seeing Ryan's suitcase wheels bumping my threshold. The way my mother's eyes scanned past me, like she was checking what I'd built and deciding what she deserved from it. That look wasn't new. It was old. It just showed up in a different house. When I was a teenager, mornings started with me moving around the kitchen quietly. Not because anyone asked, because if I moved too loud, my mother's face would tighten and the whole day would tilt. Ryan would come in late, hair still wet from the shower, grabbing whatever he wanted from the fridge. "Where's my lunch?" I'd slide a paper bag across the counter, already packed. Sandwich, chips, an apple. The same thing every day. He'd peel it open, frown. "No cookie." My mother would glance up from her coffee. "Lauren, put something sweet in there. He's got a long day." Ryan would lean back against the cabinet like a king waiting to be served. "Yeah, Lauren." I'd swallow whatever rose in my throat and reach for the cookie jar. It wasn't that I didn't love my brother. I just learned early that love in our house looked like making things easier for him. That was what people call being parentified. I didn't have the word for it back then. I just knew I was the one who noticed everything and fixed it before it became a problem. If the trash was full, I took it out. If the rent was due and my mother's paycheck was short, I picked up an extra shift at the diner. If my mother came home tired, I made dinner without being asked. Ryan got to be tired too. Ryan got to be overwhelmed. Ryan got to slam a door and still be seen as the good kid having a hard time. One afternoon, I came in from work still smelling like fryer oil, shoes sticky from spilled soda. My mother was at the table with a stack of bills. Ryan sat across from her, tapping a pencil like he was bored. My mother didn't look at me right away. "Your brother needs money for his field trip." Ryan sighed dramatically. "It's for school." I set my bag down. "How much?" My mother's eyes finally lifted. "You tell me. You're the one who keeps track of things." "I'm not his parent." The air changed. Ryan's face sharpened, like he'd been waiting for that. My mother's voice went soft in a way that never meant softness. Don't talk like that. He's your brother. Ryan pushed his chair back a little, not standing, just making space for the performance. Forget it. It's fine. I'll just tell everyone I can't go because my sister doesn't care. My mother stared at me like I'd dropped something fragile and watched it break. Lauren, don't be cruel. Cruel. That word landed on me so often, it started to feel like my name. I reached into my wallet and put cash on the table. Not because I believed the script, but because I knew what would happen if I didn't. The house would go cold. My mother would stop speaking to me except in clipped instructions. Ryan would walk around like a wounded hero. Ryan scooped up the money. Quick. Thanks. My mother exhaled like the crisis had passed. See, that wasn't so hard. Later, in my room, I stared at the ceiling and tried to name what I was feeling. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't hatred. It was that dull understanding that facts didn't matter as much as whoever looked most hurt. That pattern didn't disappear when I got older. It just grew teeth. And standing on my porch this morning, watching my brother push his way toward my front door, I could feel the old roles reaching for me again. Like muscle memory. I didn't let them lock back into place. The day my world collapsed didn't announce itself with a storm. It started as a stolen favor. I was finishing a double shift when I walked out to the parking lot and found nothing but an oil stain where my sedan should have been. My keys were still in my pocket. Ryan must have used the spare I kept hidden in the kitchen drawer. Before I could even process the theft. My phone buzzed. Where are you? My mother's voice was already pitched in that high, accusing frequency. At work. Mom. Someone took my car. Ryan had an accident. She snapped, cutting me off. He hit another vehicle. He's lucky to be alive. The air left my lungs. Is he okay? And why was he driving my car without asking? There was a loaded silence. He said you gave him the keys. Lauren. He also said you knew the brakes were soft, that the steering pulled to the right. I leaned against the brick wall of the diner, my palm stinging against the rough surface. There is absolutely nothing wrong with my car. I just had it serviced. He said you didn't tell him, she continued, her voice hardening. He thinks you left out the problems on purpose because you were angry about the chores. He's hurt. Lauren. Hurt outranked truth in our house. It always did. I took the bus home, my mind racing. When I walked into the living room, the stage was already set. Ryan was draped across the sofa, an ice pack pressed to his shoulder, looking like a wounded martyr. My mother hovered over him, her face a mask of righteous fury. You could have killed me, Ryan said, his voice a pathetic rasp. I didn't give you that car. Ryan, you stole it, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. He winced, adjusting the ice pack. You told me it was fine. You always do this hide things just to see me fail. Is that true? My mother demanded, stepping between us. No, he's lying. Look at the maintenance records in the glove box. I looked at the car. Lauren. My mother screamed. Ryan showed me. The brake fluid line was leaking. The signal lights were out. You sent your brother out in a death trap. I froze. My car had been perfect that morning. In that moment, I saw it in Ryan's eyes, a flicker of smug triumph. He hadn't just crashed the car. He had tampered with it after the fact to ensure the blame stuck to me. He had sabotaged my only asset to buy her sympathy. I can't stay in a house where my son isn't safe, my mother said, her voice turning cold and clinical. Pack a bag. You're going to your aunt's. Maybe a few months of being alone will teach you the value of family. It wasn't a request. It was an eviction. I stood there, watching Ryan's lie become the new family gospel. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I realized that in a theater where the lead actor is also the director, the supporting cast has no lines that matter. By the end of the week, my room was a shell. My name was scrubbed from the Sunday dinner list. Standing in my Aurora kitchen now, 13 years later, I can still feel the ghost of that betrayal. They kept that version of me, the dangerous, resentful sister, because it made their dynamic easier to maintain. I didn't just leave that house. I left the version of me they tried to kill. I didn't leave with a plan. I left with 2 duffel bags and a bus pass that still smelled like ink. My aunt's place was quiet in the way guest rooms always are. Too quiet to stay long. I slept on the couch for a week, picked up shifts wherever I could, and learned how to move without expecting anyone to catch me if I slipped. That was how the next stretch went. Coffee shop in the mornings, office cleaning at night, a diner on weekends when someone called out. I learned which shoes lasted the longest and which managers paid on time. I learned how to keep my head down without disappearing. I didn't call my mother. She didn't call me. Once, about a year in, I ran into Ryan at a grocery store. He was standing in front of the freezer, door open too long, staring like the answer might frost over if he waited. "Lauren," he said, surprised but not happy. "Ryan." He glanced at my uniform. "You still doing that? It pays rent." He smirked. "Must be rough." I waited for him to say something else. He didn't. He grabbed a frozen pizza and walked away like the conversation was finished. That was it. No apology. No question about where I lived. Just confirmation that the story he told himself was still working. The years stacked up after that. I stopped correcting people who got things wrong about me. It took too much energy. If someone thought I'd walked away from my family for selfish reasons, I let them. I didn't have proof they wanted to hear. Work stayed honest. You showed up. You got paid. You didn't. You didn't. Baking started as a favor for a co-worker's birthday. One batch of cookies, wrapped in paper I borrowed from the office supply closet. Someone asked for more. Then someone else. I learned ratios, timing, what burned and what didn't. I learned how to fail quietly and fix it the next night. Ryan, from what I heard, stayed close to home. Different jobs, short stints, big plans. My mother covered the gaps. She always had. By the time I rented my first real kitchen slot, I hadn't spoken to either of them in years. Not because I was holding a grudge, because there was nothing left to explain. The story they told about me didn't need my participation anymore. I built something else instead. I watched them from the kitchen before I opened the door. The camera feed showed Ryan pacing, stopping, pacing again. My mother stood still, hands folded around the handle of her purse like it anchored her. When I unlatched the chain and cracked the door, the warm air slipped out first. Butter, sugar. The oven had just shut off. Ryan noticed immediately. "You always did like to bake," he said, as if we were picking up a conversation paused yesterday. "I'm working," I replied. He nodded toward the suitcases, 2 large ones, scuffed, overpacked. "We won't get in the way." My mother leaned forward. "You have the space now." "It makes sense." "It doesn't," I said. Ryan sighed, loud enough to be heard. "We're not asking forever." I didn't answer that. I reached down and picked up the folder from the console table. The paper felt heavier than it was. My mother's eyes tracked it. "What's that?" "Boundaries," I said. "Written down." Ryan laughed. Short. "You're serious." "I've been serious for a long time." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to do this. Mom's been through enough." My mother's lips pressed together. "Your brother needs stability." "I'm not his plan," I said. Ryan's face tightened. "You really think you can just shut us out?" "I already did," I said. "You just noticed." A neighbor's car rolled past. Slow. I felt suddenly aware of the open space between us, the way the street carried sound. My mother took a breath. "After everything I sacrificed, I know what you gave," I said. "I also know what you took." That stopped her. Ryan tried again, softer this time. "Let us in. We'll talk." "We are talking." He glanced at the door, then back at me. "You think paper protects you. It protects my house, I said, and my work. I slid the top page forward just enough for them to read the heading. Cease and desist. Notice of no trespass. My mother's voice shook. You would do this to your own family. I'm doing this for myself. Ryan scoffed. You've always been cold. I felt it then. The old pull. The urge to explain. To soften. To fix. I didn't. I need you to leave. I said. Now. They stood there a moment longer. My mother looked at the doorframe, then at my face. She lifted a hand like she might touch my arm. She didn't. Ryan grabbed his suitcase handle, jerking it back. This isn't finished. I know. I said. I closed the door carefully and locked it. The click sounded final. I stood there until their shadows moved off the porch and the camera alert cleared. The kitchen was quiet again. I turned back to the counter and wiped flour from the surface, steadying my hands before I reached for the next tray. The inspection notice arrived 3 days later, wedged between a flour invoice and a shipping confirmation. The subject line was chillingly formal routine review, required access. The call from the health department came before noon. We received an anonymous tip regarding sanitation and labor violations. The voice said, practiced and neutral. I didn't argue. In the catering world, an anonymous complaint is a weapon, and Ryan had just pulled the trigger. The inspection was grueling. I had to pause production, delaying 3 major corporate orders. The inspector was methodical, checking every temperature log and ingredient label. By the time he left, my kitchen was confirmed spotless, but the damage was done. The pending review status on my profile caused 2 cafe contracts to auto-pause. That evening, Ryan called. Heard you had some uninvited guests at the bakery, he said, his tone thick with mock sympathy. Stay away from my business, Ryan. I'm just a concerned citizen. Lauren, people should know who they're buying from. But, he paused, his voice dropping. This could all stop. Families should support each other, especially when one is doing so much better than the rest. You want a payout? I said flatly. I want what's fair. He countered. Think about it. These inspections can get very frequent. I hung up, but not before recording the call. I didn't panic. I went to see a local attorney. She spoke in the language of nouns and hard deadlines. We'll send a cease and desist for harassment and tortious interference, she said, sliding a draft across the desk. And we'll send it via certified mail to ensure we have a court-admissible record of service. The moment Ryan received that letter, my phone exploded, not from him, but from my mother. You're suing your own brother, her voicemail screamed. After everything I sacrificed, you're using lawyers against us. You're tearing this family apart over a few cupcakes. I forwarded the audio to my lawyer and stayed silent. A week later, Ryan returned to my porch. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked entitled. I didn't even go to the door. I pulled up my camera feed, confirmed it was him, and dialed the non-emergency line. When the officer arrived, I opened the door just wide enough to hand him a folder. Inside was the certified mail receipt and the notice of no trespass my lawyer had filed. Sir, the officer said, turning to Ryan with a firm, professional stance. You've been legally served notice to stay off this property. If you don't leave now, I will have to take you into custody for criminal trespass. Ryan's smug expression vanished. He looked toward the sidewalk, where my mother stood by the car, watching. She didn't move. She didn't defend him. For the first time, the golden sun was standing in the cold light of the law, and his mother's shadow wasn't long enough to cover him. When the patrol car finally led them away, the street returned to silence. I went back to my kitchen, touched the cool granite of my counter, and felt the order of my life click back into place. The house didn't feel quieter after the police left. It felt grounded. The vibration of the patrol car's engine seemed to have shaken the last of the ghosts out of the vents. I sat at my kitchen table and opened the file I'd been building since the first anonymous complaint hit my inbox. Audit of emotional and financial debt. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. I had converted 13 years of family favors into cold, hard math. 2012 rent gap covered for Ryan, $1,200. 2014 emergency car repair funds redirected to Ryan's gambling debt, $3,500. 2017 lost wages from managing Patricia's health crisis while Ryan was finding himself, $8,400. I added the $48,000 in lost contracts and legal fees Ryan had just cost me. At the very bottom, in bold black ink, I typed current balance owed to family $0. Current balance owed to Lauren incalculable. My phone buzzed. An email from my mother. He's desperate. Lauren, he lost his housing. You've made your point. Don't let him starve. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the audit. 2 weeks later, the health department cleared my kitchen. The pending flags on my contracts vanished. My business was bruised, but the bone wasn't broken. When Ryan called me late one night, his voice sounded thin, stripped of the golden boy bravado. Mom cut me off, he whispered. She says she has nothing left to give. Then it's a balanced equation, I said. I'm not giving you money. Ryan, you're really going to watch me go under. I'm going to send you a list of staffing agencies for overnight warehouse shifts. I replied, it's hard work, and the lights are fluorescent, and nobody cares if you're the favorite son. That is the only help I have left. A month later, an email arrived. No subject. Just a photo of Ryan in a blue industrial uniform, standing under the harsh lights of a loading dock. He looked exhausted. He looked like I used to look. I saved the photo to his contact file, not as a trophy, but as a receipt. That evening, Patricia knocked. I let her in, but I didn't offer tea. She walked through my home, her eyes lingering on the clean, professional lines of my life. She saw the printed audit sitting on the counter. She read the first few lines, then looked away. You're so much like your father, she said, her voice trembling. So precise. I had to be, I said, because nobody else was keeping track of the cost. She didn't ask to stay. She didn't ask for a loan. She saw the zero at the bottom of the page and realized the account was closed. She left quietly, her shadow finally exiting my porch. I sat in the silence, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands. The house held its shape. I was finally, officially, debt-free. Mornings settled into a productive rhythm. Orders flowed, prep lists were checked, and deliveries arrived with mathematical precision. My part-time assistant often joked about the radio I kept on a low, steady hum that served as background proof that the world was still moving. Even when I wasn't rushing to catch up with it, the legal folder remained on the entry table. I didn't hide it under a pile of mail, nor did I obsessively check its contents. Simply knowing it was there, a physical barrier of my own making, was enough. Ryan didn't return to my porch. When his name finally appeared in my inbox months later, the entitlement was gone. It was a short, dry note about a shift change at the warehouse. No demands, no guilt-tripping. I replied with a neutral, received, and went back to my invoices. My mother reached out during the holidays. Her message was brief 2 lines, hoping the house was warm. I responded with the same polite distance and put my phone face down. For the first time, her silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a mutual agreement. In their place. New sounds filled the rooms. Friends brought over home-cooked soup. Neighbors dropped off a sprawling pothos plant for the window. Laughter moved through the hallways without asking me to shrink or apologize for taking up space. One evening, after the last cooling rack was cleared, I sat at my table and let the quiet sit with me. It wasn't the old heavy silence of waiting for a storm. This was a different kind of calm, the stillness that follows a completed audit. I realized I had spent half my life rehearsing explanations for people who were never going to listen. I used to believe that if I just found the perfect words, the door to their approval would finally open. But Lauren Bishop doesn't live in that hallway anymore. I didn't seek a public victory, and I didn't set out to punish them. I simply closed one door and built a home that didn't require it to be reopened. I turned off the lights, the house standing firm around me, and locked up. If this story stays with you, remember this. The real success wasn't the house or the business. It was the moment I finally stopped carrying a debt that was never mine to pay.